He felt strangely different as he walked through the pouring rain toward his flagship restaurant in downtown Chicago. Tonight, there was no sharp-tailored suit, no polished luxury car. Instead, he blended into the crowd like an ordinary customer, his damp gray hair and worn jacket whispering of everyday struggles. What he was about to discover inside would shake him to his core and remind him exactly why he had once fallen in love with the restaurant business. The most powerful lessons often appear in the least expected places, and tonight would be one of those unforgettable nights. David pushed through the glass doors of Harrison's Prime, the restaurant that had launched his career. The warm glow of the lights and low murmur of conversation wrapped around him, but something felt off. The usual energy was strained like a violin string pulled too tight. This wasn't a random visit. Troubling customer complaints had reached him, and he wanted to see his restaurant from the eyes of a guest. The hostess barely lifted her gaze from her phone as she snatched up a menu. "Just one?" she asked, her tone flat like she was reading off a grocery list. David nodded, noting how she seemed more interested in her text messages than in welcoming him. She led him to a cramped table near the kitchen doors, the kind of spot usually saved for guests they didn't expect to tip well. Settling into the chair, David studied the dinner rush. Servers darted between tables with practiced motions, but their smiles were stiff, mechanical. The laughter floating across the dining room felt hollow, as though the diners were actors pretending to enjoy themselves. This was not the warm family atmosphere he had envisioned when he first opened these doors. Then he saw her. A waitress in her early 40s stood by the service station, her auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail that had clearly seen better days. Her name tag read Linda, and something about her movements drew his attention. While other servers rushed through their tables with little more than a glance, Linda stopped, listened, and made each customer feel important. She refilled water glasses before they were empty, leaned in to hear their stories, and somehow managed to make every guest feel valued. But David noticed something darker, too. Younger servers whispered when she walked past, rolling their eyes when she offered to help. Linda moved with quiet dignity, yet David could see the weight pressing on her shoulders. Her smile flickered when she thought no one was watching. The night was rough. A businessman at table 12 snapped his fingers like a king. A young couple loudly complained about their appetizer. An elderly woman stubbornly sent her soup back for the third time. Yet Linda faced each challenge with unshakable patience, handling every situation with a grace that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. David ordered something simple, a chicken dinner. He wanted to observe, not stand out. As he waited, he watched Linda juggle 6 tables with the ease of long experience. She remembered that the man at table 8 drank his coffee black, that the woman at table 4 was celebrating an anniversary, and that the teenager at table 6 was anxious about paying for his very first date. Then, something caught David off guard. After serving a particularly difficult table, Linda slipped into a narrow alcove between the kitchen and dining room. For a brief moment, when she thought no one could see, her composure broke. Her hands trembled as she wiped her eyes. David froze. His hardest-working employee was quietly crying. Another server dropped off David's food without so much as a glance. But his attention stayed fixed on Linda. She returned quickly, smile back in place, but now David noticed the subtle tremor in her hands, the deep breaths she took between orders, and the way she counted her tips with desperate precision. As the night went on, David began piecing together her story through small observations. He watched her calmly handle a spilled drink while the customer berated her for ruining an expensive shirt. She apologized sincerely, offered to pay for cleaning, and somehow turned the man's rage into grudging respect. When a young family struggled with a noisy toddler, Linda went beyond taking their order. She fetched crayons and made funny faces until the child burst into laughter. "Excuse me, Miss," David called softly when she passed his table. She turned, smile practiced, but up close he could see exhaustion etched in her eyes. "Yes, sir." "Is everything all right with your dinner?" "Everything's wonderful," David said gently. "I was just wondering, you seem to truly care about this place. How long have you worked here?" For the first time, something genuine crossed Linda's face. 8 years next month, she replied with quiet pride. I started right after my husband passed. Mr. Harrison gave me a chance when no one else would hire a 40-year-old woman with no experience. David felt a pang in his chest. He remembered making that hiring decision, but had never followed up. That must have been difficult. Starting over. It was terrifying, Linda admitted, her smile softening. But this job saved us. My daughter was only 10, and I needed stability. The people here became like family, even when times got hard. Before David could respond, the manager, a sharp-faced young man named Craig, strode over. Linda, you're needed in the kitchen. There's an issue with Table 9's order. His tone was curt, dismissive. David didn't miss how Linda's shoulders stiffened. Of course, she said quickly. I'm so sorry, sir. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. As she hurried away, David studied Craig with suspicion. All night, the manager had treated staff like replaceable pieces instead of people. He had publicly embarrassed a young server over a tiny mistake, rolled his eyes when Linda suggested comping a birthday dessert, and seemed obsessed with cutting corners rather than creating the experience David had always envisioned. The breaking point came near closing. David saw Linda quietly approach Craig about a scheduling issue. She spoke respectfully, almost apologetically. But Craig's reply was loud enough for nearby guests to hear. If you can't handle the hours, maybe you should find another job. Plenty of people would be grateful for your position. Linda's face flushed, but she only nodded and walked away. Moments later, she disappeared into that same alcove. This time, her tears didn't stop so quickly. David couldn't remain seated any longer. Something was deeply broken in the very restaurant he had built, and it ran far deeper than a few service complaints. When Linda re-emerged, David caught her attention. Miss, could I have just a moment of your time? I promise I'm not here to complain. Linda hesitated, glancing nervously toward Craig, who was busy counting the register. I'm sorry, sir, but we're closing soon and I still have tables to clean. Please, David said softly. Just 1 minute. I'm a business owner myself, and I think you could help me understand something. Something in his voice must have convinced her. Linda carefully sat across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Up close, David noticed the calluses on Linda's fingers, the way her uniform had been stitched back together at the seams, and the kind of exhaustion that seemed carved into her very bones. You mentioned you have a daughter, David began softly. She must be in high school now. Linda's tired face brightened. She's a senior. Honor roll. Wants to study nursing. She's everything to me. Then her smile faltered. But college is expensive, and with my hours being cut. Her voice trailed off, embarrassment flashing across her face. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear about my problems. Cut hours. David pressed gently, though he already suspected the truth. Linda glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. The new management philosophy, they call it. Fewer full-time employees means lower benefit costs. I used to work 40 hours a week. Now I'm lucky to get 25. They even hired 3 part-timers to replace 2 full-time staff. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I've been searching for a second job, but nothing pays enough to make up the difference. David's anger surged, but he kept his tone calm. That must be incredibly stressful. I love this job, Linda said, and her voice carried a quiet desperation. I love making people feel welcome, being part of their celebrations, helping families enjoy a night out. But I don't know how much longer I can keep it up. My daughter's college applications are due next month, and I promised her I'd help with tuition. David studied this woman who had given 8 years of loyalty to his restaurant, treating every guest like family, all while his own manager was tearing down the very culture David thought he'd built. He saw her counting her tips again, lips moving silently as she calculated whether groceries would stretch through the week. Have you ever shared these concerns with the owner? David asked carefully. Linda gave a soft, bitter laugh. Mr. Harrison? I've never even seen him. Craig says he's too busy with his other restaurants to care about people like us. And really, what would a man like that know about trying to raise a daughter on a waitress's salary? The words struck David like a punch. A woman who had carried his vision for 8 years believed he didn't even care that she existed. At that very moment, Craig stormed over, his expression thunderous. Linda, what are you doing? You still have side work, and I'm not paying you to chat with customers. Something inside David cracked, like a dam giving way after years of pressure. He rose slowly, his full height making Craig instinctively step back. Actually, David said, his voice calm but commanding, I'd like to hear more about this management philosophy you've been pushing. Craig blinked, confused and irritated. Sir, we're closed. You need to settle your bill. My name, David said simply, is David Harrison, and I own this restaurant. The silence was deafening. Linda's eyes went wide, her hand flying to her mouth. The staff froze, watching the scene unfold. Mr. Harrison, sir, I had no idea, Craig stammered, his arrogance draining away. If I'd known you were coming, that's exactly the problem. David cut him off. You didn't know, which means I got to see exactly how you run this place, how you treat the very people who are the heart of my business. He turned to Linda, whose face was pale with shock. 8 years ago, I hired a woman looking for a second chance. I remember you walked in wearing your best dress, nervous but determined, and you promised to work harder than anyone if I just gave you the opportunity. Tears welled in Linda's eyes. I kept that promise every single day. I know you did, David said gently, but I failed to keep mine. I promised you'd be part of a family here, that you'd be respected. Instead, I got so busy building an empire, I forgot why I started. His eyes snapped back to Craig, whose face had shifted from pale to flushed red. Cutting hours to dodge benefits. Treating loyal staff like disposable parts. Creating a culture where someone like Linda, who embodies everything good about hospitality, feels invisible. That is not efficiency. That is failure, Craig tried weakly. But the quarterly reports show... The reports don't show Linda staying late to comfort a widow who dined alone, David interrupted. They don't show her buying crayons with her own money so restless kids can laugh instead of cry. They don't show her remembering that Mrs. Peterson likes extra whipped cream because it reminds her of her late husband. David pulled out his phone and dialed. Patricia, it's David. Prepare a termination and management transition plan for Harrison's Prime. His eyes never left Craig. You can clear out your office tonight. He sat back down across from Linda, who was staring at him in disbelief. I need to ask you something. Be completely honest. If you could change anything about this restaurant, what would it be? Linda looked around at her co-workers, who were hanging on every word. I don't know where to start. Then start with what made you love this place in the beginning, David encouraged. Tell me what's changed. And slowly, Linda began to speak. Not about schedules or policies, but about the soul of hospitality, the part that had been slowly dying. 3 months later, David stood in the same spot where he had once seen Linda cry. But everything had changed. The restaurant buzzed with a new energy, genuine warmth that couldn't be faked or dictated from corporate memos. Linda approached, her smile real this time, lighting her entire face. She wore a new name tag that read, Linda, Assistant Manager. Confidence radiated from her posture, the kind that had been hidden for far too long. The new training program is working beautifully, she reported with pride. Staff retention is up 60%. Customer satisfaction is the highest it's been in 3 years. David nodded, pleased. But more than the numbers, it was the sight of Linda's daughter Jessica greeting guests as the new hostess that mattered most. The girl was saving for nursing school, her warmth echoing her mother's natural gift for hospitality. Tell me about the scholarship program, David said. Though he already knew the details, Linda's face glowed. We've already helped 5 employees' children with tuition. The community response has been overwhelming. People see that you care about families, and they want to support us. She paused, her voice dropping. I never thought I'd be able to help others the way you helped me. But Jessica's full scholarship means I can finally give back. David remembered the day he'd called the nursing school personally to set up the Employee Family Scholarship Fund. One call, but the look on Linda's face had been worth more than any profit margin. As the dinner rush kicked in, David watched his team moving together with effortless rhythm, mentoring, encouraging, supporting one another. This wasn't survival anymore. It was family. You know, Linda said softly, I used to think success just meant keeping your head down and making it through each day. But working with you these past months showed me something. Real success is when everyone around you rises too. David felt his throat tighten. You taught me something too, Linda. That no balance sheet can ever replace the human connection that makes all of this matter. Later, as he made his weekly rounds, listening, celebrating, making sure no one ever felt invisible again, David paused at the door. He looked back at the warm glow of Harrison's Prime. Inside, Linda was patiently training a new server, explaining that the secret to great service wasn't speed or efficiency. It was remembering that every customer is someone's parent, spouse or child worthy of kindness and respect.